Welcome to the Jewish Geography Podcast. I'm your host, Rabbi Eitan Levy. So this is another podcast where I'm just throwing out ideas. I'm basically took a few little notes on Evernote, and I'm speaking more or less extemporaneously. So please excuse if it's less polished than it has been in the past. There's more little pauses and ums and things like that in here than you might have been used to from past ones. But I'm lightening up a little bit on that to hopefully get out the podcast more often. And I know that some people out there prefer the less formal style, and hopefully this is more in that spirit and that you'll like it. If you really like it and you want to hear more of these, please go to patreon.com/Rabbi Eitan and pledge to give $1 a month, $5 a month, $10 a month, whatever you can afford and seems reasonable to you, and that would be great. So we're going to go on here. We're going to have a little bit of talking about the Parsha, Netzavim Vayelech. I want to talk about social media and private versus public, and I want to talk about sort of a new concept of understanding, or let's say a binary of different ways of understanding our religious lives. And I think it's a pretty good episode, so I hope you agree. Enjoy. So I recently came upon this new term that I've been throwing around a lot, and it's been turning over in my mind. It's called Moralistic Therapeutic Deism. It's originally from a book that was published in 2005. I'm forgetting the name right now, but hopefully I'll think of it. A book published in 2005 about the beliefs of teenagers in the United States. And this was basically a study done by some, I think, Christian social scientists who were really interested in what do all these kids really believe? What are their real, religious, moral, spiritual beliefs? And this included largely, kids who went to, conservative Christian denominations and churches and whatever. I think Jews were, as is the reality in America, were too small of a statistical we are a blip statistically in America. We're about 1.5%, so I don't think we were mentioned in there. But this rings true to me from much of the world that I grew up in, and a lot of the let's say, all except the most conservative, small c, of Jewish denominations probably fit into this, and it's, well, let me tell you what it is. So moralistic therapeutic deism is the term they came up with to describe the set of beliefs that they found to be more or less common to almost all teenagers in America. That's in 2005. So 12 years ago, those teenagers are now in their mid-20s or late 20s. And the idea is it's moralistic in the sense that they believe that God wants certain things from you. He wants you to be a good person. He wants you to be nice to people, etc. It gives people a moral structure. But the moralistic side of it is modified by the therapeutic, the second word, because the morality is essentially therapeutic in its goals. It's the things that help people get along and do well and for society to function. Not much more beyond that. And then the last term is deism, which is the classical idea of deism is that there's a disinterested God who sort of who is seen essentially as a sort of like the force. It's sort of a collection of all things and all being in the world, and that we're going to describe it as God. And it doesn't really have a will of its own, so to speak. But again, that deism is modified by the term therapeutic right there in the middle, because in this worldview, it's not exactly consistent. And it says that, God's kind of far away. He doesn't really get involved, except when I want him to, when I need him to, when I need him to help me through something. And it's usually for the purpose of supporting whatever I want to do anyway. Meaning it's therapeutic. It's God comes in the role of approval, but not in the role of disapproval. God comes in to give support, but not to give what's the word? Tochacha in English, to give rebuke. God is a purely therapeutic deity that comes in to serve your needs when you need them. And this strikes me as very true, that probably most Americans do believe in this. Certainly, unless they're very rigorously intellectually committed to a relatively conservative religious doctrine. And this strikes me as an exact reversal of what Judaism is about. That, well, maybe I'm overstating it. Not an exact reversal, but a partial reversal, let's say. The point of following the Torah is about us doing what God wants. It's about us drawing close to Him according to His dictates. Because after all, He's the creator of the world, and we're just members of this world who exist in it. God is the be-all and end-all of existence, and we are just us. But we can become more than ourselves. We can become bigger than just ourselves by joining in and serving a project that's meaningful and that has value because it serves the desires of the creator of the universe, of God. In other words, it's not about whether God is with you. The question is, are you with God? And of course, there's also what I would call a therapeutic side to the way we practice our religion. We do believe that God is with us. We do believe that everything God does is for the best, even when it hurts. But that's part of the thing, is it's not therapeutic in a modern psychological sense. It's therapeutic in a sense of giving us broader purpose, but sometimes that purpose can be painful. Sometimes that purpose is not serving what we see as our own personal best interests. Sometimes that purpose is difficult to explain, or it's not good for us socially. It can cause all sorts of problems if we look at things from a more secular perspective. But that's because the therapeutic value of it is secondary. My wife came across an article that she's writing a response to. We're not sure if it'll be published or not. And the woman sort of wrote about the question of intermarriage. And, she was writing from the perspective of a, let's say, non-Orthodox Jewish person, and she was taking on this idea that, why really should people care about intermarriage if they're not concerned with the actual Jewish practice of either partner, right? So if one partner doesn't actually do anything Jewish in their life and they marry someone who's not Jewish, what difference does it make? Right? Or why do you care who they marry? And I thought it was actually a pretty good point, but she sort of started out the article by talking about how, well, after all, I can see that there's value to Judaism because it helps gives people communal structure and support and all these things, and therefore, it should be good to do it. But if you don't actually do any of the things, then why should it matter? But I feel like even the way she described the positive aspects of tradition from her perspective was essentially a moralistic therapeutic deism view. Meaning the view was, I see some therapeutic benefits of religion, and that is the essential justification for its existence. And that is the way I can justify in my mind, decent people actually doing all these things that the religion dictates and being part of it. And that's backwards. We do the things that the religion dictates because we believe in a greater purpose. We believe that God gave us a mission to bring His presence into the world through the light of the Torah by following His commandments and by representing Him in this world, and that we've had, a 4,000-year tradition of this mitzvah, of this commandment, of this covenant, that we are here to save the world, to bring God's light back to all of humanity. And that's why we keep these commandments. And that's why, one of those commandments, which is that a Jewish person is supposed to marry another Jewish person, matters. And personally, I find it hard to justify insisting in marriage on purely cultural grounds, although I would certainly encourage anyone who feels that way to go ahead and, if you're Jewish, to marry other Jews. But for me, this is just one commandment among 613 that we are enjoined to keep. So just to close this up, that's one example I brought, but essentially the idea is people believe in this concept of moralistic therapeutic deism. I think now that I've given you the term, if you're anything like me, you're going to see it everywhere. It's going to come up in almost any religiously related conversation you're going to have, or spiritually related, in some circles, conversation you're going to have. The idea that people have a God who wants people to be good, but is sort of far away, and really is only brought to bear for therapeutic purposes, meaning basically for the purpose of helping you feel good and making your life better in a very, let's say, secular type of way of understanding what making your life better is, meaning you are happier in a clinical sense, right? And you are getting along better with people. You are higher on all these scales of social and physical wellness, but not necessarily by following all these specific laws and doing things that are hard and seeing suffering as part of your service of God sometimes. Although we don't believe that God particularly wants us to suffer, but we do believe that sometimes he feels we need to. And that really, that is a reversal of the truth, which is that we are here to figure out how to serve God, not the other way around. So I've been thinking about a lot what the problem exactly with social media is. I know if you're anything like me, especially after the recent election, you were probably sort of disgusted with social media and wanted to step away from it. And it really began to turn me off, let's say. And I've been sort of trying to step away from it as much as possible. And I've started to see that part of what it does that disturbs me is that it confuses us about what is the private domain and what is the public domain. In Jewish law, on the Sabbath, on Shabbat, there's a law about carrying objects. You're allowed to carry things around inside your home, inside a private domain, but you're not allowed to carry it out from the private domain to the public domain, meaning out into the street. But there are also some fuzzy gray areas, right? There's what if you have like a courtyard that's shared by multiple houses called a mavo, and is that counted as a private part of the private area or part of the public area? It's a whole discussion in the Gemara. But there's an essential and important differentiation that we make between private and public domains. And a lot of us, we treat Facebook as if it were private, and we sort of expect some degree of safety and consideration of what we say and what we do there, as if we had invited someone into our home. But in fact, we're in public. We're actually out in the middle of the street, screaming out to everybody about everything, and publicizing things which by any sort of traditional standard are private, meaning they belong to you. They're not exactly things to write home about, let alone to write articles about or to publish, right? So, the food we eat, cute things our kids say, things which generally one would have understood until about 10 years ago as private experiences that you might talk about with someone. You might tell people you're close to about, but you're not broadcasting it. If you have a radio show, you're not going on there and telling everyone what you had for breakfast. And it occurred to me that this is sort of it also reflects part of what's happened to the political understanding of what conservatives and liberals in American politics, anyway, are sort of trying to do. That they've essentially folded the private and public domains into one domain. So let me see if I can put this into as clearly as possible. So it seems to me that both sides, liberals and conservatives, have sort of folded these ideas into one realm, and that's part of the problem of why they're grating on each other so harshly. So I think from the liberal perspective, they see conservatives, at least Christian or moral conservatives, as wanting to impose a sort of public morality on the private sphere. So, things having to do with gay marriage and things like that. Liberals and conservatives see liberals as wanting to impose the private sensitivity and self-censorship that one might show in a personal relationship with the person they care about on the public sphere, right? So, when you have a private conversation with somebody, you are going to be, or at least you should be, sensitive to their particular issues and whatever. That's not necessarily true in a public discussion, certainly not in a public debate. And by trying to enforce those boundaries, that sensitivity on people outside their private areas, they are essentially imposing a somewhat draconian moral code, ironically, on individuals who maybe were just a bit insensitive, maybe, believe terrible things, or maybe not, maybe just, we're speaking more bluntly than we would like. So it's an interesting problem, and I just wanted to put it out there. I don't have a whole lot to say about it, but I thought it was an interesting idea. And I think something that comes out of that is trying to maintain a distinction between public and private. And Jewish law gives us some boundaries for doing that, like I was explaining, our home lives and our and our spiritual lives and things like that, and versus our public lives, and parts of our spiritual lives are also in public, and specifically political life. And I think the biggest difference to make is the differentiation between our politics and our private lives. Because think about it, right? Like when you talk to a good friend, you can have a good friend who really disagrees with you about politics. Politics isn't everything. It doesn't have to permeate everything. And in our personal relationships, we see that. But if you have most of your interactions with somebody over the internet, especially in public forums, it's very difficult to show that level of consideration. And you certainly can't expect it from people online. So I think what I'm advocating is a little bit more consciousness and awareness of what is public and what is private, to try to be more sensitive to people in public spaces, but also to expect less of other people in those public spaces. Don't expect to be shown the same consideration you would in your private relationships online or in public, and I think you'll be a lot less likely to post a lot of particularly private or difficult things, and I also think you'll be a lot less set up for heartache in the long run. Surely, this instruction which I enjoin upon you this day is not too baffling for you, nor is it beyond reach. It is not in the heavens that you should say, who among us can go up to the heavens and get it for us, and impart it to us, that we may observe it? Neither is it beyond the sea that you should say, who among us can cross to the other side of the sea and get it for us, and impart it to us, that we may observe it? No, the thing is very close to you, in your mouth and in your heart, to observe it. Those are part of this week's Torah portion, Nitzavim. It's actually a double portion, Nitzavim and Vayelech. It's from the first of those. Excuse me. And it's making what I think is a critical point to understanding the entire worldview of Judaism. The previous chapter 29 in Deuteronomy, is explaining what's going on. You're entering a covenant with the Lord your God. And this covenant, the Torah, is not baffling, it's not beyond your reach, it's not in the heavens, lo b'shamayim hi, as we say. Now, when the Torah says it's not in heaven, Rashi is a major medieval Jewish commentator, and he says, for were it in heaven, it would still be your duty to go up after it and to learn it. In other words, the Torah is made imminently accessible. What God wants from us, the thing we need to do to draw close to Him, to perfect our imperfect natures, and to draw close to Him, is something which is completely within our grasp. And even if it were something which were seemingly in the heavens, something which was far away, that we had to strive and was difficult and only special, talented people were able to get there, still we would have to go do it. But that's not the case. The case is that it's given right into your hand, and all you have to do is try. This gets down to a central, let's say, disagreement, I think, between at least some forms of Christianity and the Jewish worldview. And what brought this to my attention, it's something I've been bumping up against a lot recently, but what brought it to my attention was in a previous post that I made, my friend Aaron, hi Aaron, I know you're a listener, he was very surprised when I said something about it was in a private conversation, but he asked me what I thought about this thing that a minister said, and he sent me a video of it, and I responded to just sort of the first sentence where that minister began speaking, that Judaism disagreed with the basic worldview that he was laying out, that mankind is inherently sinful and evil. The Jewish worldview is not that. The Jewish worldview is that mankind is inherently good and is given now the choice, after eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden, we have now the choice of choosing to do evil or choosing to do good, and we have, inclinations that pull us in both ways, but ultimately, sort of on the highest level, we are good, and it is our inherent nature to want to pull towards the good, and it is a sort of a perversion of our nature to choose to do evil. And that may be part of why the idea that following the law, as Christians, some forms of Christians will sometimes call the Torah the law, which isn't really a good translation, because the Torah is a teaching or a covenant, but it's not only law, but let's just call it that. But following these laws and following the terms, let's say, of this contract, of this covenant, are not something that's beyond us. It's our natural, we believe that it's our natural inclination to want to draw close to God, and that all it requires is the choice to do so and to put in our best effort. And therefore, Judaism really has no need or we don't see any requirement for a figure like Jesus to be sacrificed on our behalf, because we've already been given all the tools we need to atone for our own sins and to avoid making new ones in the future and to draw close to God. I'm anticipating an objection that someone might say and say, well, what about the Messiah? I'll say, well, the Messiah is supposed to lead the Jewish people to a sort of a national redemption, freeing us from the yokes of our enemies, defeating them, bringing peace, rebuilding the temple. He's supposed to help us organize and do the things we need to do on a national level. But individually, we don't need any savior any more than God himself, and the Torah that he gave us is the guide book to how to approach him. And we really don't need much more than that. We have the Torah, and by which I mean both the written and oral Torahs as expounded by the rabbis, and that is all we need to get close to God and to do what's right in the world. So I just wanted to put that out there, and that is my commentary on that piece. And now I want to comment a little bit more closely on that famous line, Krov elecha hadvar me'od. The thing is very close to you, in your mouth and in your heart. So, in general, we take that it's in your mouth to be referring to what you're thinking and feeling, right? That you're thinking that you're feeling the mitzvah, right? So say you're praying, and you're praying in your heart. So that's good, but in Judaism we say you also need to have an action associated with it for it to be considered the fulfillment of a commandment. So that's how it says in your mouth, so that you're going to say words. That's sort of the minimum thing that counts as an action, is mouthing the words with your mouth as you're reading the prayers, even if you do it very, very quietly so that it's not really audible. Mouthing the words, that makes it an action. And then Bachia's commentary goes a step further, and he talks about that the last piece of the line, lasot oto, the thing is very close to you in your mouth and in your heart, to observe it, lasot, he considers that last word, to observe it, to do it, is actually a more literal translation of the word. To do it is the third. So actually there's three things. It's in your mouth and in your heart, and doing it. So in your mouth is one, and in your heart. So in your heart is great. That's important, and probably the most important, because if it's not in your heart, then saying and doing it is of relatively little avail. So your heart is listed in the middle of the three, and he says that indicates it's the most important thing, which is a bit of a complicated way of reading the lines, because sometimes rabbis talk about the thing that's listed first to mean it's the most important. Sometimes it's the most important because it's listed last, but we'll just go with it for now. So first you need to have it in your heart, but then to fully fulfill it, you have to have it in your mouth and to do it. So both to say things with your words, which Rabbeinu Bachya takes to mean learning, like learning Torah, because remember, for most of Jewish history, most Torah was learned orally, spoken, and then doing commandments physically going out and doing commandments, shaking the lulav and etrog on Sukkot, eating kosher food, giving charity, all the good things that we're supposed to do. So really, it's not only saying that the thing is close to you, that it's something that is doable, it's giving you the basic outline of what counts as doing it. First, you have to take God into your heart. You have to have it in your heart that you want to do it, that you're doing it because you want to serve God, because you believe in it, not because God is a candy machine and you put in a coin and you get out your treats. You may not get a reward in this world. It may have to wait until the next world. But you're doing it out of love. And then you have to learn it, because how are you going to know what to do if you don't learn? And then you have to do it, because without fulfilling what you feel in your heart and have learned with your mouth through the actions of your hands, you haven't accomplished anything. In fact, you may have accomplished worse than nothing if you take your feelings and what you've learned and go against them and do the wrong thing. So we should all be blessed, please God, to be able to feel love in our hearts, to draw close to God. Coming up to Rosh Hashanah next week, we should feel close to Hashem. We should be able to draw close to Him, to serve Him, to learn, and to follow through on our ideals and bring what we really believe in, the goodness and divine spark within all of us, into the world. Thanks for listening to the Jewish Geography Podcast. This is Rabbi Eitan Levy. I want to just thank you for listening, and again, if you would like to donate to the podcast to see more episodes come out so I can help me be able to dedicate more time to this, please go to patreon.com/Rabbi Eitan. That's patreon.com/Rabbi Eitan. And, donate $1 a month, $5 a month, whatever you can afford and whatever you think this is worth. And I've got my first goal up there. When I get to $500 a month, I'll commit to putting out a podcast every week. Until then, I put out one last week, and again this one this week, but at the moment I'm not committing to more than once a month, but hopefully I'll be able to do this more often. And I really appreciate you listening, and if you like it, please share it. Please go on iTunes and leave a review. I know not everybody has iTunes, but if you do, that's the best place to leave them. But if you have a different podcasting app or whatever that you use, that's great too. Go on there, leave a review. If you like it, feel free to be in touch. And again, if you like the podcast, please go on to Patreon and give a little bit, whatever you think it's worth. And thank you, and please God, I'll be back next week. Probably not, but probably after Rosh Hashanah in a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and we'll talk again. In the meantime, God bless and be well.